There are
Great
secrets
to
that
meet
eat you
you.
alive
You
from the
too.
inside,
Thanks for the
and there are
help.
secrets that
Anytime.
quietly
Come back
save
soon.
I
someone's
will.
life without them ever knowing. Nathan Caldwell had been carrying the second kind for 11 years, and on a Tuesday morning in March, he decided he was done carrying it alone. He was 43, a warehouse supervisor at Veritic Solutions in Charlotte, North Carolina, with calloused hands, a 10-year-old son named Eli, and a lunch pail he'd been bringing to the same building since Eli was still in diapers. He wasn't the kind of man who made speeches or sought attention. He coached Little League on Saturdays, made his son's lunch every morning before sunrise, and kept his head down at work in the way that honest, tired people do when they've learned that the world doesn't hand out extra credit for the visible effort. The appointment had been scheduled for 2 weeks. Nathan had asked the front desk 3 separate times to confirm it, because he needed to know he was actually going to go through with this. Each time the receptionist said yes, it's on the calendar, he'd felt his stomach tighten in a way he hadn't felt since the hospital, since the night everything changed and he made a choice he never told another soul about. The CEO of Veritic Solutions was a woman named Claire Ashworth. 47, self-made, the kind of person whose story got written up in business magazines every couple of years. Daughter of a factory worker, first in her family to graduate college, built Veritic from a regional logistics startup into a company with 400 employees across 3 states. Nathan had spoken to her exactly twice in 10 years, both times briefly, both times in passing. She was not a distant or cold woman, but she lived in a different altitude of the company, and people like Nathan generally didn't request private meetings with people like her. Her assistant had been politely puzzled when he called. "Can I ask what this is regarding?" "It's personal," Nathan said. "It'll make sense when she hears it." Claire was already seated when he was shown into her office. She stood to shake his hand, and he noticed she looked at him the way people look at someone they feel they should recognize but can't quite place. That look would change before he left the room. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "please, sit down. I'll be honest with you, my assistant mentioned this was personal, and I've been curious since then. Have we met before? Outside of work?" "No," he said. "But you've met my wife. My late wife." Claire went still. "Her name was Rachel," Nathan said. "Rachel Caldwell. She was a nurse at Mercy General 11 years ago. She worked the overnight shift in the cardiac unit." He watched Claire's face in real time. He watched the doors open behind her eyes, the ones people keep closed around strangers, and he saw something raw and bewildered move through her expression like weather changing over water. "I remember a nurse named Rachel," Claire said slowly. "The night of she stopped." "How do you know about that?" "Because she told me," Nathan said. "Not everything. She was careful about patient privacy, even with me. But she told me enough." He leaned forward slightly, his hands folded on the table between them, steady despite everything moving inside him. "You were brought in by ambulance. Heart arrhythmia, they thought at first, but it was more complicated than that. You were alone. No family had made it to the hospital yet. And you were," she said, "you were frightened in a way that went beyond the medical part. You told the nurses you had no one to call." Claire's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That was a long time ago. Rachel stayed with you," Nathan said. "Past the end of her shift. 4 hours past it. She held your hand through 2 procedures and she talked to you about anything and everything to keep you from disappearing into the fear. She told you about our son, who had just turned 1. She showed you a photo of him from her phone. She said you laughed and said he had the best cheeks she'd ever seen on a baby." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Claire Ashworth, who had built a company on composure and precision, who had sat across from investors and competitors and grieving employees without once losing her footing, pressed her fingers briefly to her mouth. "I have thought about that nurse," she said, "more times than I could count." "I know," Nathan said gently. "Because she thought about you too. She came home that morning and told me she'd sat with a woman who was all alone and so scared, and she said, 'I want to get this right because I've been rehearsing it for weeks.' She said, 'I hope someone is kind to that woman for the rest of her life, because she deserves it.' That's what she said. Those exact words." Claire looked at him for a long, unguarded moment. "She never told me her last name. She wouldn't have. That wasn't her way." Nathan cleared his throat quietly. "Rachel passed 4 years later. Ovarian cancer. Fast and unfair, the way those things are. Eli was 6. He paused. "I've been raising him on my own since then. Claire said nothing. She didn't offer the usual words people reach for in these moments, and somehow that silence was more respectful than any of them would have been. I've wanted to find you for a long time, Nathan continued. To tell you that the woman who sat with you that night was my wife. To tell you she was like that with everyone, she never turned off. She carried people with her whether they knew it or not. And I guess I needed someone other than me to know that. Someone whose life she actually touched. He exhaled slowly. Eli's going to ask me someday what his mother was really like. Not the idea of her, the real her. And I want to be able to tell him that she changed things for people. Quietly. Without needing credit. That's who she was. Claire stood up slowly from her chair. She walked around the desk and sat down in the chair beside him, not across from him, and Nathan understood that she was deliberately closing the distance between employer and employee, between altitude and altitude, because what was happening in this room required a different kind of geography. She did change something for me, Claire said. I went into that hospital that night having spent 5 years telling myself that building something meant you had to build it alone. That needing people was a liability. A pause. Your wife held my hand for 4 hours and didn't ask anything from me. She just stayed. And I walked out of that hospital different. I don't know how else to say it, just different. Nathan nodded like he understood, because he did. I started a mentorship program 8 months after that night, Claire said. For first-generation college students. I've never told anyone what made me finally do it. I never forgot what it felt like to have someone stay. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Eli has her eyes, Nathan finally said. And her stubbornness, which is both a gift and a daily challenge. Claire laughed, and it was real, the kind that comes from somewhere that has been quietly aching. She reached across and put her hand over Nathan's for just a second, the way people do when words have run out but the feeling hasn't. Thank you for finding me, she said. And thank you for raising that boy alone and still making time to do this. To give this to me. Nathan stood to leave a few minutes later. As he reached the door, Claire spoke one more time. Mr. Caldwell. Nathan. Is there anything Eli needs? Anything I can do? He turned and gave her the kind of smile that's been seasoned by a loss. He needs what all kids need. People who show up. He put his hand on the doorframe. Rachel taught me that. I think she taught you too. He walked back down to the warehouse, picked up his clipboard, and went back to work. Just like any other Tuesday. Except it wasn't, and both of them knew it, and that knowledge, quiet, private, unannounced, settled over the building like something that had finally, after 11 long years, found its way home.